Hey everyone, Yasin here, and welcome to another episode of the Psychological Problems Podcast. And today, I'm here with Flavia.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about art things. But first, I thought I would address I'll address one comment from the last...
The comment.
Well, it's just one of the comments from the last podcast, because we seem to have a lot of people who are opinionated, I guess. And I read this comment and then saved it because it was just my favorite. So I'm going to go ahead and share it with you, good people. So here's the comment. Same bullshit over and over again. Is it some special rule of advantage, artists, to never ever mention the true way of improvement and only keep their sibling can learn it for free? So in this case, advantage is in quotes, true is all caps, and sibling is spelled sibling.
Maybe
and I
it's
kind of,
something else. Maybe it's
I don't know, I imagine like a cyborg child. Okay, it continues. Drop that shit and tell us the truth. You keep talking about how art takes so much time and practice, yet never touch the subjects of that fucking twats in their 12 to 14 who can draw like a fucking art gods, even though they pick up the pencil 2 hours ago. And after that, you try to convince us what talent don't exist? Open your fucking eyes and get out of your safe space into real life. Also, your ranting gets really irritating. You don't have a scenario and your speech really cheesy. So, tell us the truth! How to practice to achieve results fast like that fucking 14 years old twats! I'm fucking tired of all that work and practice and having no result whatsoever while those twats get it immediately! Tell us how to achieve that and stop with that cheesy lectures!
I imagine they had a heart attack after They keep talking about underage genitals.
14-year-old twats. Well,
like that can't be right.
Well, so to that, I didn't know what to say. It's like, is this person trolling? But then I imagine, like, I had some degree of, I don't know, I think I could relate on some distant level, because I did feel like, how are people so good? How come I suck? When I was younger. But this.
Do you know anyone like this in real life?
This extreme?
Yeah.
No. Like, first of all, I didn't know there were 12 to 14-year-old art gods who picked up a pencil 2 hours ago. Like, I consider maybe Kim Jung Gi is art god level. If there is such a thing, I would put him on that. Who are these other people? Because he drew all his life. Anyway, I didn't know what to say. But I thought it was pretty funny how into it he gets. And stop with your cheesy lectures. Like, no,
really? It sounds like a girl to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It sounds like an angry girl writing. Stop with that cheesy lectures.
Okay.
Like.
Anyway, whoever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. That's something.
Open your fucking eyes and get out of your safe space into real life.
I just imagine this person yelling this stuff to us on our lawn.
Yeah. I imagine them with like a metal ladle and a pot, and they come out and then start banging it until we wake up. Bing, 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 bing,
Romania style.
Anyway, all right. So that's a thing. And then, I guess, I mean, we covered it last session, like, you don't have to watch the videos, but that's not enough.
But they commented on other streams. Almost identical comments.
Oh, okay.
So they clearly didn't get it. And I don't know how we could have made it simpler.
And just imagine they think they're strapped down. Or maybe they are. Maybe someone straps them down. You will watch these. You will listen to these podcasts. No, I can't do it. You will. Ah! Stop with those cheesy lectures.
Maybe their teacher plays it at school or something. And they just have to sit through the class.
Then what do they say to their teacher?
Nothing. They just come to YouTube and they comment.
Anyway, moving on.
Yeah.
So, other things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk a bit about different ways of thinking. Like, I've talked about analytical thinking versus intuitive thinking. And sort of the consequences of learning these. And also, I wanted to touch on, I don't know whether to call it artistic ego, but it's something where, and I had this as well, when you're trying to learn art, you have these ideas of what you're going to be able to do and what it's going to take. And then with these notions, you then proceed to seek education. And what I found is, for instance, let's just make an example. So, well, I'll just use myself because it works. So I figured, okay, so I need to learn how to draw. And if I take lessons, then I'll learn how to draw. And then I'll be able to like draw and paint. And I'll be able to paint from imagination, right? Like that's how it works. That's really, I guess that's like the holy grail, to be able to draw and paint whatever you want from imagination and have it look as good as the professionals.
Yeah.
And some people don't have this and they're more realistic. Like they don't think, well, I'm going to be the greatest artist ever or something like that. But some people do have pretty high goals. And with it, there's sort of these ideas that I think need to be clarified, because depending on how you learn and what you learn, you will be able to do certain things. And some of the art you might look at might be impressive, but for instance, a person who paints very realistically, for instance, might look really cool. And you might think, well, okay, I'm going to learn how to do that. And the way I'm going to do that is I'll just draw a lot, and then I'll eventually be able to do that and paint like super realistically. But that's not really how it works, because a lot of people who paint realistically, in fact, almost all of them, are heavily using reference. They're not using imagination to draw. And the way they've learned to draw, most likely, or learn to paint, is geared to painting things very realistically. And that method that you learn, for the most part, is something that's pretty analytical. It's something that you can learn step 1, step 2, step 3. And that's one thing. Okay. So there's that, learn a very rigid, analytical approach and be able to, for instance, paint very well or draw very well from reference. Not without reference, but from reference. Then you have this other side where it's more intuitive, and it usually requires a lot more in terms of mileage and just drawing. But then you can draw things from your imagination, and they're not perfectly correct, but you can do a lot of interesting poses and draw many different things. And that, again, requires a lot of drawing experience. So let's say there are people who say, well, I want to be a manga artist and I want to draw like Akira Toriyama and like Dragon Ball stuff, and I want it to look like that. Well, then doing studies of still lives and making them look very realistic isn't necessarily going to help you. So I thought I would clarify these two forms of learning, and I'm going to be pretty extreme here just for the sake of making a good example of how these are different, and also because the way I think is kind of extreme. So when I'm analytical, I'm very analytical. And for the most part, when I was learning to draw, I used a very analytical approach. And I found that I could draw and paint at the end pretty well from reference with a few, like I could do some stuff from imagination, but it wasn't the same as what I would see, comic artists draw. Not to say they don't use reference, but certain artists, could just come up with stuff a lot easier. And it wasn't until I started drawing in an intuitive way that I could do those things. So let's just walk you through some of the fundamentals and how they might be approached differently from either an analytical or an intuitive point of view. And maybe you can glean which one of these sides you're more like, and maybe certain styles work better for you. So to begin with, proportion. So with an analytical approach to proportion, it's a lot about studying guides in the beginning. Like you might have seen like the 8 head tall figure or the 7.5 head tall figure. So what you're doing is you're learning to measure things and create a generic model which you can then work off of. So after drawing a bunch of 8 head tall figures, you get a sense of, oh, this is what proportions look like. And then you can alter those, and it's not so hard because you've learned that. You might need to build formula things to help you. For instance, what I used to do is I would put a tick for the top of the head, a tick for the bottom of the feet, then go in between and put a tick mark, and then you can kind of build a figure that is based on these measurements. But after a while, you don't need it anymore. And so I suppose at that point, it does become intuitive. And a lot of things that are analytical over time become intuitive. So it's very much centered on that and correct proportions and knowing things like, the elbows, if you put your arms down, the elbows are on the same distance as your belly button. So it's like, okay, or I don't know, the scapula is the same height as a hand. I think that's how it works. And that there's 3 scapulas of width on the back. And I don't know, just these types of things where you're thinking about things.
So basically you're building a mental template.
Yeah.
And you're always referring back to it.
Yeah.
It's like a middleman.
I don't know if you always refer back to it. I think you refer back to it a lot in the beginning, and then it sort of you wean yourself off it.
So it's like training wheels.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's what it is. You're using the guides to start to build this thing in your head. So I guess I'll talk about the pros and cons of this method. So the pros are, first of all, it works for analytical people, which is useful, and you can pick it up pretty quickly. And most of the analytical things, like if you just learned all the analytical proportions, and not proportions, but the fundamentals, you could probably get it in a few years, maybe 2 years, 3 years. You don't need like a ton of drawing experience beforehand, but you do need to put in tons of work. But it's easier to get these things. But that's if you're analytically minded, because if you're not, it can be very difficult. But one of the pros is it's pretty, once you get it, it's like, okay, I can pick this up and it's pretty easy. One of the cons is it's hard to think very creatively or in an abstract way when you're building on these things. You tend to stiffen up in how you think about things. So.
You were mentioning earlier about being analytically minded. Do you think this analytical versus intuitive thing, do you think it's a state of mind, or do you think it's an approach?
Well, I guess I thought it was an approach, but based on a way of thinking.
How much overlap do you think there is? Like, okay, so let's say you, for yourself, you found it easier to pick up the analytical approach. How much would you say is, oh, you're stuck in what you are good at? Like, how hard would you say it is to change?
For me, it wasn't that hard, but I've seen some people who can't breach it. And one of the things is that either approach, whichever one you get better at, or even a combination, but usually if you're very good at something and you want to do something completely different, it's quite difficult to overcome the
emotional
hit
part
to your ego, I guess. Because for me, when I started Pointy Chins, I was basically doing that. I was starting from scratch. And, I'm going to learn how to be an intuitive person from being an analytical person and find this style thing. And I knew I was going to suck. And especially considering I have had, I guess I still have like an audience who knows me, and I suppose expects a certain degree of ability to go to a very weak stage. Like, of course, I wasn't starting 100% from scratch. I was using techniques that I would say people use, but I still had mileage. But yeah, I think it's pretty hard to break free of it because it's hard to be good at something and then not. And I see this with people who they draw from reference a lot, and then when they draw from imagination, it's really bad. So they go back to drawing from reference, and then they kind of get scared into studying all the time because they don't trust themselves. They don't trust they'll get better at it.
Yeah, that's fairly common.
Okay, so those are the pros and cons. So let's move on to anatomy. So an analytical way of learning anatomy is very based on, I guess, anatomy books and just studying. You observe the skeleton. You kind of do it the same way with proportions. Like, you learn the measurements. You learn, okay, so I forget, but there's a bunch of these similar proportion rules that work.
So a lot of this is academic then?
Yeah, it's very academic. Well, yeah, analytical, I would say, is academic. You could replace it in an approach, because in an analytical or academic model, it has to be teachable. And you can't teach intuition, but you can teach recipes. You can teach formulas. You can teach how to, okay, do this, step 1, do this, step 2, do this. But it's much harder to teach intuitive things. And when I made my iterative drawing, it was really, that's the best I could offer for teaching intuition is, okay, draw a bunch of times and draw the same thing and make minor changes. And you will, by virtue of mileage, absorb whatever the secret sauce is that intuitive people have. So yeah, with anatomy, it's, learn things, learn the names of things, learn where they connect.
And they're all very conscious and they look very verbal.
Yeah. Very conscious, verbal, I guess even mathematical in some cases.
Yeah, very quantifiable.
Yeah. So the pros of this are you come across as intelligent. You seem like someone who knows a lot. Because I used to know, at least in terms of superficial anatomy, pretty much all the muscles. I don't know if I got all the bones, but I got the big ones. And it felt like I know something because I could tell you. It's like, okay, so draw a figure with good anatomy. No. That's tough. But in a very basic form, it seems like you've learned a lot. And the problem with it is that just because you know words, it doesn't mean you can draw. It doesn't mean you have understood the relationships. But if you are using reference, it's kind of helping you deal with the drawing part, and then you can use your knowledge to understand what a thing is doing. So you might look at a figure and light's hitting them in a certain way, and you see a bump, and you happen to know, oh, that's the deltoid. Oh, okay. Or that's a brachialis or whatever. And it's like, okay, so I'm able to decipher things because I've got this
recognition.
Yeah, I've got a blueprint of what these components are and where they go. However, if you draw a lot, eventually, like all things, it becomes intuitive. So you do, even with an analytical approach, eventually move towards an intuitive approach, but it's not to say that you will have that. You probably will get that over time if you learn to make it more intuitive. But
would you say it's prone to being rigid? Like, okay, so you'll learn, you'll map out the body and whatever, but that's like, I don't know, it just feels like this is going to be an instance of what you've learned, but that doesn't mean you'll know the full spectrum of
and
the concept.
It gets very difficult when you see the body move, because you can get a static figure and learn like, okay, so this is this muscle and this is what it's called. But then when the body's in motion, things move around, they change proportion, they change in many different ways. And so it's like, okay, well, that's kind of hard. And so when you're trying to create from imagination, it's a bit more like assembling pieces where okay, so, well, I start with this figure and then I start with the skeleton or the rough idea, and then I build on top, and then I build on top, and then I build on top. Whereas if you're more intuitive, you can sort of move into an abstract where it's, here's a rough idea of a body, and I know that this muscle is going to be activated. So, moving on to design and composition. So the reason I group these two together is not because I actually believe they're the same thing, although composition, of course, is part of design. It's that composition is pretty much acknowledged as a fundamental, and design really isn't, but I feel like design includes composition. It's like the actual idea of what you're dealing with.
This must be a recent thing of the times, because I remember reading these old art books about composition, and they were including design, and they were including a lot of other concepts, and now all the tutorials seem to be sort of shrunk to something palatable. Maybe
it's something that I just missed that period. But the way I've seen it, it tends to be a focus, especially in art books, on composition, not design. And I guess composition is considered design, but the reason why I think of design, like, ideally, I would just call this design and screw composition. Composition is just part of design. But the reason I would do it that way is because with design, you can also think about shape language, and you can also think about distribution of elements in other things rather than just the big piece. It's also, appealing shapes and stuff. Like, a lot of shape stuff is in design, and composition is one form of design. But when I was thinking about it in terms of, well, what would you learn? They kind of were the exact same thing. And it's basically because composition is in design, so of course. Yeah, I think they must have broken off into sort of different schools, and they wanted to sort of differentiate themselves. No, we're designers, we're object-oriented, and artists are like image-oriented. And I think depending on what discipline you learn, this is different, because I know people from, like, a lot of people who go to art center will call themselves a designer. They won't call themselves an artist. They'll say, I'm a designer, I'm an industrial designer. Or and I suppose people from a graphic design background, although I have no I've never taken a graphic design course, so I don't know much about it, so I feel pretty unqualified to comment on it. But I would imagine they would be thinking about design in a much broader sense.
Yeah.
So anyway, with an analytical approach to design, as with the other things, it's very dependent on rules. You can learn things like, the golden ratio, or the Fibonacci sequence, or the rule of threes, which isn't the rule of thirds. There's two rules. The rule of thirds is dividing a picture plane into 3 by 3 segments. A grid where you split it, and then in the intersections or on the lines, that's where you put focal points. The rule of threes is that in design, 3 is a number which tends to offer a pleasant amount of things to be. So it works with 3, 5, 7, 9, pretty much odd numbers. If you have 2 of something, it tends to create a relationship where things feel like you have one against another. There's a lot of contrast.
Yeah, because you tend to group things into pairs.
Yeah, and if you have 4 of something, again, it creates an order. But if you have 3 of something, it creates there's a feeling of this could be natural.
Mm-hmm.
So what you want in art, usually, I mean, not always. Of course, for everything I say, there's exceptions to the rule. No one's going to listen to that.
No one's going to go, why don't you give us the recipe?
But anyway, I'm talking about, for the most part, you want to make things look like they're kind of natural. Especially when you're dealing with fantasy things, it means even more when you're dealing with fantasy or sci-fi, that you want it to look like, oh, this is something I could believe.
This is plausible.
And so you look to nature and look to things you already see, and you incorporate that, and then you put your spin on it, so it doesn't look so contrived. So there's that. There's the 80-20 rule, which is basically you have, like in composition, the idea is you have 20% negative space or 20% positive space and 80% negative space or 80% positive space. In that ratio, you can also apply it to design in terms of areas of rest and areas of interest, where you have a lot of detail clumped together in maybe 20% of a form or a shape, and then the rest is no detail at all. So your eye rests, and then it finds something interesting, and then it rests again, and so you give a pleasant experience to the viewer. And small, medium, and large shapes, this can also be that whole 3 thing, where you have 3 of a thing, and you tend to have an assortment of small, medium, and large. And usually you might go small, large, medium, or large, small, medium, or something where you sort of vary it. You don't necessarily go small, medium, large, or large, medium, small. And that's, again, it's something that when you have a variety, it creates interest, and contrast is what you go for. And using these creates contrast. So a lot of something and a little of something else is more contrasty than equal portions of both.
It sounds very optimized.
Mm-hmm. So the pros of this are pretty much that it works. You create things, and it's like, oh, you don't need to spend years just practicing. You can have bad compositions, take a class that takes an hour, 2 hours, and then have pretty decent compositions if you follow those rules, because they're not that complicated. They might be hard to implement, but if you're very conscious of it and you factor things in, and you start with your grid, and you make sure you've got things aligned, you go for high horizons or low horizons in a landscape or things like that. It's like immediately you will have a better composition than an average person. And your work will look like, it'll look okay. In terms of negatives, one thing is, I don't think it's that fun to
Yeah.
Always be, okay, let me break it down, let me break it down,
standard.
let me break it down into rules. Yeah, that's the other thing. The other thing is we've seen it so much. Because it's an easy rule, most people follow it. And because most people follow it, although you're giving the viewer's eye something interesting, it's a very predictable thing because people have just seen this over and over again. So it's not offensive and it is good, but it's not super great. And it seems like people with stunning compositions often are breaking these rules. And the reason it catches you off guard is because it's a little bit different. And I think that kind of like music chords, where you could learn, like certain basic chords, and it's like, okay, this progresses into this and this and this. But if someone puts a spin on it, it's kind of more interesting. It's like, oh, I didn't expect to hear that. I didn't expect to see that. And I find Craig Mullins is really, really good at this, making compositions that don't necessarily follow the rules, but they are so much more interesting. And a lot of really good people with really good compositions say that they don't really follow these rules. So, something to consider. All right. So, value and color. Analytically, this is something that is, it still takes work. But in the beginning, you start with your values and you learn a value scale, which is, you have maybe some people flip it, but sometimes 0 is black and 10 is white, or sometimes 0 is white and 10 is black. And then you create a gradation going from these two, and you give each part a number, and then you can say, well, this is a value step of 4. This value is gray of value 4, and then this halftone is a value of 5, and things like that. And with that, you can employ rules like, again, very rules-based. When you create an image, make sure that in the shadow, there is nothing lighter than the darkest part in the lights. Aha. Okay. So maybe you'll think, well, I'll create an image and the shadows are going to be between 0 and 3, and the lights are going to be between 7 and 10. They're going to be in that area, and then I'm going to have a mid-tone area, which I'm going to keep pretty much empty, and I'll only approach it in the halftone, and then you can structure out your image, and then work from life. And I mean, I've talked about, how to get better with understanding values. Most of my tutorials are all the analytical way anyway.
That's why they're tutorials.
Well, yeah. And then with color, it's understanding things like split complementary palettes. What are those? Well, they're complementary palettes, but if you use a pure complementary palette, it creates a bit too much contrast. So by splitting the complement, it is like, okay, it takes a bit of the edge off and it looks a bit more natural. And gamut masks are the same thing. They're basically limiting, you have a color wheel and you're limiting how much of that color wheel you use, and therefore you will create interesting or pleasant combinations of color. Because with color, pretty much the worst thing about color, especially in the digital age, because this wasn't so bad in the past, is people use too much. They don't know where to not use a color, or how to subordinate colors, or how to, especially when you're beginning. And most of this goes back to, I don't know if it's the same for people in Europe or Romania or whatever, but I know in North America, for children, things are often too bright, too saturated, too primary.
For sure.
The colors are very intense. So if you're given a box of Crayola crayons or something, all of those...
In Romania, you're given a box of Crayola colors. You're like the king of the neighborhood.
Crayola.
Crayon.
Anyway, so in reality, the colors you see most of them are much less saturated than the colors you get as a kid in paints or crayons or markers. And luckily, there are brands, like over time, brands have shifted towards, like Copics has a lot of neutrals now and things like that. But yeah, the problem with color almost always is people have too much choice and they don't know how to handle the color. And what the rules do, color theory, is really kind of like taking away crayons from, let's say you had a set of 1,000 crayons and someone's just taking away the one set. It's like, these things don't work well together, and saving you that trouble. So that's one side of it. And then understanding light is, when are you going to finish your foundations of light and color? Never. The thing with light is, again, it's very important to learn, and it's something that you can teach in a very scientific way. You can explain optics and how light refracts and how, learn your terms like ambient occlusion or specular highlights or...
and then you get to sound cool.
Caustic reflections. And yeah, again, it's just like, oh, okay. This is why. I think a lot, like what kind of annoys me is when people get high off knowing these terms. Like they're better than you because they know a term.
But I've encountered this in so many other fields.
Yeah. I think it's just in anything where people get obsessed with jargon.
Well, it's implied that if you know these terms, you know how to, like, you know, the concepts behind these terms.
Yeah.
Even though you might not.
Yeah. So.
And I find it especially funny when I've heard this from teachers that I've had, and they will use a term incorrectly, but very confidently so. And the students will diligently write it down.
Well, that's unnecessary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so anyway, that joke was because one of Flavia's English teachers was saying necessary is pronounced nassery.
Oh yeah. I had a teacher, and she was butchering quite a few words, and I had quite a few conflicts with her where I would bring up the dictionary and look at the pronunciations like, no, this is not what this means. This is not how we say it. No.
So the pros of this value and color thing is you don't need to worry about having bad color sense. And that's something that plagues a lot of people. They feel like, I don't know color. And color, for some reason, has this almost like either you have it or you don't. Like you have a color sense or you don't. You have taste or you don't. And if you don't, you're screwed. And if you do, you're good. And color theory demystifies it. And it's like, no. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry that you don't have a sense for what looks good together, because this rule will explain how to make things work. And not just that, but it trains, like you can train your observation skills to see color as it really is and understand, what saturation and hue and brightness a thing should be. And that is very empowering, I think. It helps you to get over this fear of not being able to do something. And this is why I think analytical things work so well, especially for people starting out late in the game. Because there is this idea of talent, and talent is what determines success. And theory is something that levels the playing field, because it's like, no, you don't. It's not that this is impossible. If you learn these methods, you can actually get this this skill.
Do you think it might also be because when you're starting art later on in life, you have, by virtue of just living, become more analytical, because day-to-day life values analytical things and tasks and abilities and stuff, and you're more sort of trained to respect that or value that or...
Yeah, I guess that is true, because if you're a kid, you do things just because you want to. And if you're an adult, you kind of have to justify whatever you're doing, because it's almost like anyone could ask at any time, why are you doing this? And it helps to have an answer. Whereas kids can kind of just do it because they like it and then get better just by virtue of doing it. Because the reality is the doing of the thing is what makes you good or makes you better, what helps you improve. The reason why you do it is not what makes you better, but the doing is what makes you better.
Yeah.
But the reason facilitates the doing. So.
That sounds funny.
Yeah. So that's did I mention the cons? Just the pros? So the pros are you get this. The cons are your stuff can look too tame. It can look too expected. You sometimes miss on some of the exciting revelations where colors they're not supposed to go, but they kind of do, and it kind of looks cool. So they're not as expressive. You've kind of got, and it's not to say you can't do this. You still can do it. It's just, okay, well, introduce more into your experiments. Throw in colors and see what happens. But that just leads to an intuitive approach anyway.
Yeah, because I think most of these pros are if you use the method or the approach, and most of the cons are if you only rely on the method. Yeah,
that's why. We'll get to the end where the value of both. Okay, so perspective. I was too lazy to do like more than just a few blocks because I hate doing perspective. I really dislike drawing in perspective. I would get better at it if I did more, but I don't like it. So I don't like doing more. So then I don't get better at it. But anyway, I did go through a pretty analytical approach to learning perspective, and I do think it's good to have, or at least it was for me. It's good to know, like, oh, I can build this thing in perspective, and basically this is the analytical perspective is kind of like the Scott Robertson approach. It's a good thing. It's something necessary if you're taking something seriously to make it, plausible. If you're actually designing objects and things, so you learn, your horizon, where your vanishing points go. You learn about the camera. You learn how to make, boxes and cubes and spheres and ellipses and all sorts of things. And it's, I suppose, to some people it's a lot of fun, and for me it's just god awful.
But it really is important if you are catering your images to a modeler or just...
Yeah, if you're building your image, or if the image is supposed to be something. Like if you're doing blueprints if an architect is building a house or anything, any structure, and they're not just gonna freehand the thing and not measure at all. It's like, no, that's gonna lead to
all the engineers, whoever might be an engineer in your audience is gonna be all up in arms, like, architects don't build houses, they just give us trouble, they just give us grief. Oh, they don't know anything.
Engineer jokes.
Yeah. There's this huge feud that I've noticed quite a few times between engineers and architects, both in schools and working on projects. And they're like, the architects are like...
Because the architects aren't as practical?
Yeah, because they don't care. They only care about the design and the effect, the impact and whatever. And they don't consider, like, your building is going to be an inverted pyramid. How the hell are you supposed to make this work?
Yeah. So the pros are it's great, it's awesome. The cons are it sucks.
I like your investment in this one.
Moving on to style. So style in this case, in an analytical approach, is kind of hard because it's something that's not really taught, and people expect you to use an intuitive approach. So I heard a lot before I ventured onto creating a style that A, you can't create a style, and B, if you do, it's going to be terrible. And so what you should do is just draw what you like, and then it naturally becomes, your style emerges. But I've mentioned it a ton of times. I always go back to The Simpsons and how the creator made the Simpsons a certain color, which is yellow, because he knew that they would stand out the most, not because he thought Caucasian people are yellow. They're all jaundiced. It's something that was a conscious decision. And with this analytical approach, I consider it very similar to learning caricature, which I think is in a way stylizing. You observe what a thing is in its normal state. So before you add any style or flourish to it, you just, okay, that's the thing. Then you consider what would help to exaggerate or make this a more true statement, perhaps, or add an effect. And then you push it towards that. So in this example, you could say the guy's got kind of a tall face, kind of. So make it taller. It's got some big hair, so make it bigger. Things like that. Oh, you take something and you make it more of that thing or less of that thing in order to emphasize the relationship between that. And where you can't do that is a cube. You can't caricature a perfect square because it is a perfect square. A caricature of a perfect square is a perfect square. A caricature of a perfect circle is a perfect circle. But a caricature of a rectangle, if it's more tall than it is wide, make it taller and less wide. If it is more wide than it is tall, make it wider and less tall. So whenever you have a difference between one aspect and another, you can caricature. If someone has, small eyes and kind of a big mouth, you make the eyes tiny, you make the mouth huge, you've done it.
But it's still very verbal.
In this, yeah, of course, it's analytical.
It's like, oh, your face is tall, and we'll make it taller. It's like it's almost like you don't even need to draw it to get the idea.
Yeah.
Of how you would do it.
Yeah, because you start with a norm, which is a generic face, and you learn your basic canonical proportion that, it's kind of weird that we use it so much because a lot of people learn from Loomis, for instance, and I did too. But it's sort of a generic Caucasian face. It's like, it doesn't consider different ethnicities except by virtue of in relation to a Caucasian face. And I'm not saying that's wrong, it's just one standard, but it is that it doesn't matter what you pick as a standard, so long as you find a standard that is fairly average. And then you deviate based on that. But that's what you need to do. And then in terms of other things like shapes, you could understand things like a square has a very solid form, a very strong, sturdy, it's a strong, sturdy, solid shape. So if you want to make a character who's strong and sturdy and solid, focus on things like squares and rectangles. Circles are, by virtue of being smooth, generally considered like soft and cute and friendly and harmless. So if you want a cute character, focus a lot on circles. Triangles are pointy and points hurt. So if you want a scary character, use a lot of points because we've already understood as kind of part of our, genetic history to understand that pointy things are harmful potentially.
Yeah.
But they're also cool and they're also fast. And like if you think of an arrow flying through the air, it's, oh, that's sharp, but that's fast. That's kind of elegant. A bird of prey. It's pretty elegant. So you can understand that, and then you can design characters based on that. And by this point, you might have noticed like all these things are very teachable, and that's why whenever you learn anything, chances are you're going to be learning an analytical approach to these things. So now I want to talk about the other side. What if you're more intuitive, or maybe you want to learn an intuitive approach? What do the fundamentals look like from an intuitive angle? Because this isn't something I've actually seen anyone cover before. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping this is helpful to someone. So with intuition, this is a lot about what I was talking about when I talked about my iterative drawing, which is you draw a ton. And for people who naturally have been, like, they've been drawing since they were little kids. Maybe they started by copying Dragon Ball is a very common start for a lot of guys anyway. Maybe Sailor Moon for girls or something, I don't know. But you start by copying a lot if you're a child, and then, or maybe you just draw your own thing and you do it because it's fun and you like to do it. And just by virtue of doing it a lot, you go through a lot of different things, and then you start to develop a sense of, oh, I like this, or this looks good. Maybe because you copied something, you sort of learn what lines work, and then you adopt that, and that becomes part of your art. And a lot of times people who draw this way sometimes look as artists a lot like the artists who inspire them.
Yeah.
At least in the beginning. So you get a lot of clones, art clones, who then later on develop into finding their own personal taste, and so then it evolves.
It's kind of like life, just outside of art. Like you'll get the kid, and when growing up, the person he admires the most or is attached to the most, they're gonna want to emulate that person, and they're gonna be like, you'll get all these girls looking at their idols and walking like them or talking like them and trying it and whatever. And then once they sort of mature a bit more, they will get their own things.
Yeah.
But as a kid, it's a very short bridge to, like, from I like this to I'm gonna do this because I like it.
Yeah.
But when you're an adult, like, oh, but should I? But maybe, but
Yeah. So either doing a ton of it or emulating is very, very useful. It's something I didn't do, and not only didn't I do it, but I hated it because I thought, I don't want to draw something someone else has drawn. I want to draw what I draw. I wanted it to be as good as them, but I didn't understand, and I felt like it was sort of cheating to copy someone else. I felt
there's this entire thing of this entire aura, but it's mostly, like, I've never heard a kid say, oh, it's bad to copy, but it's mostly an adult acquired thing.
Oh.
Yeah, you're copying something, but yeah, that's nothing. You didn't do anything.
Oh, it's something I just had. It felt almost like a moral of thou shalt not copy. You have to be original. And it's not because I actually tried to copy and I just couldn't do it. And I don't know if it's because I just didn't get any satisfaction from it. But I have learned for myself personally that even now I have a lot of difficulty absorbing information if I copy from another artist. However, if I draw from life, I don't have that problem at all. So I think I get stuck on interpretations.
Yeah, I think so too. Because from what you've talked about so far, it sounds like you had these morals very early on, and they weren't necessarily right. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, you shouldn't know if you copy, this isn't yours or whatever. Whereas if you're growing up more free, you don't get a second thought. You don't guess at it. You just do it. And then you stop doing it eventually, or not. I'm not
sure how it would have turned out, because I didn't have instruction and I didn't have anyone telling me you should or shouldn't do anything. I just thought that it's I had a very strong feeling of I want to be me, not anyone else. And also that copying doesn't, I'm not good at this. I just felt I'm not good at this.
Oh, yeah.
No one really told me you're not good at it.
Oh, yeah.
I just felt like I'm not good at copying, so I don't want to copy.
I had that too. I hated copying.
I didn't enjoy copying. It didn't feel fun. But when I did my own thing, it was like, okay. And I mean, one of the things I loathed as a kid was when you had art class and they made you color in a picture that's already drawn.
They made you do that in art class.
Yeah, and very early, like they give you a thing and it's like color this in, and I thought it was the most dull exercise. And I was always trying to add things to it in terms of drawing, like change it, alter it, because I don't want to color someone else's things. But anyway, back to this thing. So if you're not young and you didn't naturally develop this, one way of getting this quickly is to use iterative drawing. And I keep bringing it up. If you haven't seen my video on iterative drawing, I encourage you to watch that. But anyway, you draw a lot and you start to get a sense of things. Like, draw a figure. Does that figure look good? Instead of draw a figure or draw a guide and divide it into 7.5 portions and then make the head one portion and then fill in the rest with this and this and this. It's more like, you trust that you know what a person looks like. You've seen people. You see people all the time.
Yeah, it's so weird because a lot of the people that I've seen that have this issue with proportion, they don't look at people in the street and think, oh, their arms reach their ankles.
Yeah.
They have one arm shorter than the other.
In their drawings.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with intuitive things, it's a lot more trust involved because like right now, I'm using my analytical side to talk to you. That's my language side. And chances are you're using your conscious analytical side to listen to what I'm saying. And because we walk around with this, because we learn language as pretty much the first thing we learn, and then we interpret everything else. Like, think about your thoughts. You're thinking your thoughts. Most people, not all people, but most people think in language. So your very thoughts, by the time you're conscious of them, have already been interpreted by an analytical side. And so to trust the creative unconscious side feels kind of hard because it's almost like you're giving up freedom, you're giving up control, and that can be scary to a lot of people but the thing is, that's still you, that's still part of you.
Yeah.
Like, if you have a nice basement in your house, it's still part of your house. I don't know if that's not a very good analogy, but it's something where you learn to trust it. So you learn that the first thing is believe that you know what a person looks like. Believe that you know what good proportions look like. Then do a drawing and then analyze that drawing. What do I think? Does that look like what I want it to look like? Like, maybe you don't even want it to look like a person. You could use another artist as a reference or whatever, but you draw a thing. Does it look like what I like or what I want it to look like? No. Okay, what's wrong with it? Maybe the head's too big. Okay, try again with the head a different size. And each time you keep doing this with alterations until it starts to feel right. And what happens is you get muscle memory or an instinct for what looks right. And in this case, you've sort of created a case where you can now visually, you can put on the page what you see in your mind. And for me, I don't see things in my mind, but I still get a sense of things. So I can put down what feels right. And you can break or bend proportions. It doesn't matter because you're not relying on a guide. So if you feel like, this looks realistic, but I kind of want to make it more like this, then you can. In certain styles, and including my own, there is a tendency to favor things like big heads, big hands, big eyes, and all of these things are because of how we as humans interpret the world. So there's a lot of information going on in a person's face. The head is very important for a human being. So you make that bigger because you visually create what you psychologically experience. The hands as well, they're very emotive. They can do things and you can gauge a lot of what someone's doing or is about to do from observing their hands. So making the hands big, again, lends to our psychological view of things. So if you think about Disney characters, they have a big head, tiny body, big hands. Whereas babies, because a lot of it is, it's cute. And it's like, it's true. Babies do have big heads in relation to their body, but they have tiny hands. So exaggerating these features is kind of letting us psychologically or see it how we psychologically see it. So
it really does sound like there's a lot of emotion involved in this approach. Like, oh, you spoke about trust, you spoke about like what feels right or what feeling free or desiring or whatever. And I think if you're emotionally, I don't know, maybe fragile and stuff, this can get in the way of you trusting your instinct and sort of seeping into. And I feel like it's sort of easier to withdraw into the analytical.
Yeah, I would say for me especially, it was scary to be intuitive, because if someone said, okay, draw a lot and you'll get better, that's very hard for me to believe, because I don't actually believe, like, I don't know. It feels hard. But if someone says, I can teach you a rule, and today, just after you learn this, you will be able to implement it, it feels a lot more concrete and a lot more like, okay, I can believe that. And so the tendency is to forego this intuitive approach, and rather than build a connection, because this is what the intuitive approach is doing. Basically, you're building a connection between your conscious and your subconscious. And instead of doing this, turn all the subconscious or unconscious things into conscious things. And that's what analysis helps you do. It's forcing your creativity into the confines of a conscious prison. And it's making it so you don't need to use it as much. And I think it does show. I think it really shows when someone is more intuitive and their ideas are really out there. And it's like, wow, you're so creative. Yeah, well, yeah. The unconscious is pretty creative. So that's the proportion. So the pros and the cons. So the pros are you can create stuff, but like after you work on this, and it takes a while, and that's one of the cons. But the pros are you can do stuff quickly. You don't need grids. You can just start drawing, and it can look good, and it's very nice. The cons, however, are in certain things it can be difficult, especially if you haven't reined in like if you only use an intuitive approach and you use none of the analytical side, it can be very hard to do things like keeping a character on model. And what that means is every time you draw them, they look like the same character. Because if you're only doing things intuitively, you are less likely to adhere to certain rules. But in something like animation or making comics, it's very important that the character looks pretty much the same. So that's where things can get tricky. Whereas when you do have certain formulas, you can kind of get a sense of, okay, well, this is what the character is supposed to be, and they're this many heads tall, and that way I can replicate them easily. So it is harder. It's not that you can't do it intuitively. You certainly can. You just have to really consider this important and work towards, like, I am going to try to make sure this character looks a certain way. And you can use relationships between features and things to observe and help you keep consistency. But that's one of the things I've noticed where it can get a bit more difficult. So moving on to anatomy. So this is something that really helped me a lot when I switched from an analytical to an intuitive method for anatomy. And I've stopped really studying anatomy, and I don't really remember what most of the muscles are called. I remember some of the big ones, but I've forgotten a lot of that information. And the reality is because it's use it or lose it, and I didn't use it enough. But instead, I've learned to view anatomy as a collection, like a pattern, where kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, where certain things connect into other things. And this is what can be helpful for anatomy. Now, the thing is, for an intuitive approach to anatomy. The thing is, you don't necessarily need to know as much. And so if you are trying to be an anatomist, might not work. You might not have you might not look that intelligent if someone asks you what the name of a muscle is and you say, I don't know, it's just that one on the shoulder there. But for certain purposes, it's all you need. You don't need to be perfectly good with anatomy to be a comic book artist. You need an understanding of it. You need to have the basics, but you don't have to be 100% on point. And this is one of the things I mentioned when initially I was talking about what do you want to do and that there are costs to it. So for instance, if you use an intuitive approach to anatomy, you'll probably be fine for animation or comic books or most of the things you need to do to create a believable figure. You can get by with sort of a decent grasp of anatomy, but not like a perfect grasp. You don't know all the muscles, you don't know all the things, but if you're doing something very formal and perhaps a realistic painting, or you were teaching someone anatomy, it's very hard to just say, do what feels right, or observe this pattern. Like, you can kind of do it with patterns. And I think with anatomy, it's healthy to have an overlap between the two. I think with most things, it's healthy to have a bit of analysis and a bit of intuition.
I don't know, if you're thinking about a teaching situation where the teacher is mostly intuitive, you were talking about it's hard to say, do what feels right, but you can demonstrate it.
You can demonstrate it, but it doesn't mean that you know the student's taking in what you want them to take in.
Sure, but I don't know, the way I'm thinking about it is like, okay, if you want to crunch the time, sure, you can say and you can do the recipe and you can make the grids and you can give them the template, but there's also, all right, for a week, we will do this, or I will demonstrate over and over and over again, and you can draw over, because I feel like that's a much more, I don't know, as, I guess, just for myself, drawovers seem to help more than explanations, especially with art.
Yeah, I suppose it's possible to teach it. I mean, even with the Funky Monkey tutorials that I based my simplified anatomy figure, which kind of just like now whenever I look at it, I kind of don't like it. But
that aside,
what it was really grouping muscle groups together. Mm-hmm. So you group the extensors as one group instead of each individual muscle. Because the reality is you don't need to know all of them. You just need to know the biggest ones and the most superficial ones and sort of understand that. And then in certain circumstances, you do need to understand a bit beyond that. Like in certain views, perhaps more of a certain muscle shows up. But if you're doing something that's more, again, animation or comic books where everything's already simplified, it doesn't matter that much. If you're doing something very technical and you wanted to create a very realistic person, chances are you would need to know more. However, people who draw very realistically use reference. Almost always use reference. So that's mitigating the knowledge that you would need otherwise. Like, you don't need to necessarily understand what a thing is if you just copy the shape and the value of it. You will get a form that looks correct. If you get very good at this, if you get very, very good at copying shapes and learning the correct value and the correct color, you can make something look like what it looks like. And you'll be very good at like a photocopier. That's how I kind of think of it. And I did do this. I'm not going to say I was perfect at it, but I could make things look pretty close to what real looks like. And what I got from it was a feeling of, I guess. Like, people would say it's good, but I kind of knew deep down, like, it felt like, yeah, but I mean, I needed reference. Like, I basically just copied it and made alterations, but without the reference, I couldn't have come up with this from my imagination.
I think you can only get that sort of understanding after you've done it. Because prior to being able to do such a thing, I think there's this fascination, even like whether you're an artist or a layman, with a picture that looks like an object.
Like the thing.
Yeah, it looks like, similarity or replication or fidelity. It's this, I don't know, this aura of whoa, this is so awesome. And then I wouldn't know how it feels because I haven't actually done it myself. But there's this, exactly that feeling that you talked about. Like, oh, this is...
Yeah, I think it's, especially for young artists or beginner artists, there's a worth that's put on things that look like what they do, because I guess it's just a matter of growing up. You've done plenty of drawings and seen plenty of drawings that don't look like the thing. Someone could say, draw this, and you drew it, and it doesn't look like the thing. So there's this idea of, well, if I can make it look like the thing, then I've done it.
Did you have that?
Yeah, I think so. I think I did have this feeling that, well, I don't even know how to paint and make it look like the thing. But I suppose the fallacy was, if I could make the thing look like the thing, then I could draw from imagination and make the thing look like what's in my head. And that's not necessarily the case. You can learn rules. For instance, and guys like Brad Rigney, they're very good at this in terms of actually making something look good from imagination, because they have such a good understanding. But most artists use reference pretty heavily. Like, the more realistic it is, the more chance that they've used reference to get, where does the shadow go? What's that shadow color? Because you can imagine to a point, and then it gets difficult. Not to say, again, there are exceptions to the rules, like Brad Rigney, but
there's so much ego involved in this, it seems, because when we say, like, oh, they're using reference and stuff, that's not to say using reference is horrible.
No, but I think it's like the magic tricks exposed.
Yeah, because you're thinking of it as magic in the first place.
Exactly. And I think that first comment that we read in the beginning, I think that was his problem.
Or her.
He or her. Anyway, the problem was the...
thinking that there's this thing that, there's art gods, and then there's...
Yeah. And also it's a young artist's view of art is very wrong. Because as you get better, your taste gets better. As you get better, your vision gets better. So if you just say that to most people, they'll concur. Like, if you tell someone, hey, do you think if you get better at something, your ability to see gets better? It's like, yes. Okay. So you think that. Okay. So do you think your taste also could get better? Chances are, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess your taste get better. Okay. So do you think this person is good? Yeah. Okay. I know more than you, and I'm saying they're not good. Do you believe me? No.
No.
Am I better than you in skill? Well, yeah, you're better, but I know what looks good. But you just said if you get better, you can get better at seeing. And it's something that's difficult because, it's happened to me so many times where I thought, this person is good and that person sucks. And then I've gotten better and it's like, oh, that person that I thought sucked is actually not that bad. I just didn't know how good they were. With kids, they don't really consider this too much. Or at least I didn't. When I was young, I remember looking at Bouguereau Angels. He does William Bouguereau's very, 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 very excellent painter.
Of baby flesh.
From the 19th century. And I don't know. If you want to say art god, you have to put him in there. If there are such things. He's definitely in the pantheon. But when I first saw his work, my thought was, I don't like this because I don't like babies that are naked with wings. And I thought it was stupid. And then that was it. That was the extent of... There was no, oh my God, this person is amazing. Their values are amazing. Their composition is amazing. Like with Bouguereau, it's almost like every fundamental is mastered. At least it feels that way. Like just, well, there's nothing I can really say except for subject matter I don't necessarily like that much. But the rest is like, wow, amazing. But I didn't appreciate it at all when I first saw it. And then as you develop, you your vision develops as well. So at the stage I'm at, I have my own views of who's good and who's not. And surprisingly, some of my views have shifted in terms of even artists I used to idolize, where I can now see mistakes in their work and flaws and some things that are like, that's kind of ugly. But I'm still developing, so I'm probably going to change it after that as well. I'm probably going to learn new things. Like, I thought I finally got closer to my idol, and then I realized, like, no way, I'm still way off. It's like, okay. But yeah, anatomy, intuitive. So yeah, you learn these relationships between things more than the names of things.
More like you're talking about rhythms rather than elements.
Sure, but the way I think of it is like color-coded. I really like color-coded anatomy because you get to see like, oh, this color, this shape, and this color is beside this shape. Oh, okay. To me, it helps. Maybe to other people, it doesn't.
Yeah.
I really like it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. So design and composition in an intuitive sense is very intuitive. So basically, you just draw what you feel looks good, or you draw what you think will look good, and then you try a variation and see if it's better or worse. And by virtue of doing this a lot, you will come up with pretty interesting compositions and pretty interesting designs. And you can also copy other artists who are good at designing until you get a sense of, oh, well, this artist tends to do this a lot, and so if I do this, it kind of looks good. And then you can throw in your own little variations on that.
Do you think breaking down the fundamentals when you're talking about things intuitively, do you think that's even a thing? Because I don't know why. It seems to me like you're more likely to do them kind of all at once if you're going at it intuitively, like merge them together.
Sure, but in the case of iterative drawing, you can split them up. And speed up your mileage in any one of these things.
Sure, but isn't splitting them up part of the other arsenal, the other toolkit?
I guess, but that's what I did.
Well, yeah, but that's because you have both sides going on.
Now.
Yes.
But yeah. No, but in the beginning I did it as well. It's just like, I'm going to focus on proportion, but I'm going to only try to feel what draw it until it feels right. And keep drawing it over and over until it feels right. And yeah, of course you can, like, that's pretty much it. If you want the entire, if you took a fundamental course in intuitive drawing, it would be this huge book with one page that says draw it until it feels good or it looks like the way you want it to.
Yeah, copy and whatever.
Do whatever it takes.
Do whatever it takes. Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, so
you would have these huge tomes of how to be analytical and just a motivational poster for the intuitive guys.
Yeah, with cats on it hanging from a string.
Yeah, string.
Okay, not hanging like around their neck.
Yeah, not that.
Like grabbing. Anyway, okay. So the pros of this are you get very interesting compositions. The cons are. Kind of, it's unwieldy. It's relying a lot on you.
You might not get.
Yeah, like it's very trust based, and I would say there is such a thing as good taste or people with better taste than others.
And I think experience or lack of experience tends to show a lot more when you're intuitive. Like you get bigger fluctuations when you're starting out, and that can be misleading or discouraging. You might just have an accidental, really cool thing, and then when you try to do it again, it's like,
But you may not even be able to see what's really cool. And I think that's why analytical things are so appealing, because they don't rely on your ability to see as much.
It's so dissociative.
Yeah. So much as it requires you to just learn a thing, and if you do this, you will achieve a result. But personally, I think intuitive design is very important. All the intuitive things, even if you learn analytically the way I did, I would really recommend also adopting intuitive approaches as well, because it definitely helps, I think. Okay, so value and color. Value, here's a thing I've noticed. People who draw intuitively don't have the best values often. They don't have good values. They have okay values, or they have pleasant values, but they're not really accurate the way it is for people who study analytically. And I'm not saying this is, of course, a rule. I'm sure you could find some intuitive person who has really good values, but what I do notice is intuitive people have good looking images, even if the values aren't correct in a way, as in they don't look as they would in life, but they still look cool. So I noticed a lot with people that draw manga or anime, or if they're coloring it and they use a lot of pastels and stuff, and it's like, that's not really the right value relationship, but it looks nice. It's very pleasant. And so it's more about what feels good, just do it. And experimenting, like being brave enough to throw down a color you're not sure is going to work and just see. And in terms of digital art, this is so safe to do.
There's really no excuse to...
Yeah, because what I like to do is I'll put down a color on a different layer, and then I'll just use a hue and saturation slider and go around and look at, well, what if it was this color? What if it was that color? Until it looks like something like, oh, okay, I get to kind of go through all the versions it could possibly be. And I might have an idea of, well, maybe this would look cool and I can try it. And then maybe it's like, oh, actually, that doesn't look cool. Or maybe it does look better. And maybe I learn like, well, that looks better, but if I shift even further, it actually looks even better. And then I can quickly get a sense of, well, my color sense is improving just because I'm playing around with hue and saturation sliders. And I think that's a huge advantage we have in the digital age, is that we get to play around a lot more with color. And you can look at it in terms of traditional art. And look at the historical art. They don't play around with color as much. I mean, there are artists who have really accurate values. But the colors we have at our disposal, a lot of the super intense, vibrant colors, they didn't show up that much in the past. So it's something where it's like, well, we can actually push it further. I remember when I first saw Ruanjia's work, his stuff, he was just using colors that I hadn't seen before in certain ways that I hadn't seen before, and I was like, whoa,
yeah, especially so the shadows cool. And stuff.
Yeah, it's like, this is so cool. And Bumskee was doing this too. And now a lot of people do it, where they add interesting colors in shadows, colors that don't necessarily belong, but the value structure works, so it's fine. And okay, so perspective. So this goes with the same principle as proportion, where you know what looks good and you have to trust that. So in terms of perspective, if you can kind of get a sense of what things look like and you try to replicate that, you can then analyze it and try to get a sense of things. Like, it's not going to be perfect. And that's the thing. There's always going to be a bit of an error, but I've seen very good artists who have, like Craig Mullins, for example, has plenty of pictures where the perspective is off, but it doesn't look off because it's so well done. And so long as it looks believable, a lot of times with art, that's all you need, because what we're doing as artists is conveying an idea. Whatever idea we have, we're conveying that idea. So good art isn't when the anatomy is perfect. It is when the idea is conveyed appropriately, or it's conveyed well. And for someone who wants to show you what really good anatomy looks like, and that's their idea, well then, yeah, good anatomy is super essential. But if you want to show something that's just like, oh, here's a heartwarming scene of these people, well, good anatomy, or it might be useful, but it's more like, unless it's taking away from the image, it's not as essential, as long as you capture the important elements that you're trying to.
I think you could convey a heartwarming scene even with like stick figure, scribbly.
Oh yeah. I mean, people do.
Yeah.
There are a lot of webcomics that rely on the fact that simplicity is all it takes. Even with the emojis on phones and stuff, it's like a lot of them are super simplified, but they get the message across.
Yeah.
So something doesn't have to be correct to be right. Because to be right, you just have to be accomplishing your goal, which is to make the thing, get your message across. So there's that. So the pros are, I think it's a lot more fun to do perspective, kind of this intuitive way. I think it creates more interesting images often. And besides, if you need to work it up, you still can learn an analytical approach and sort of fix everything to make it more accurate. And the cons are that they're usually not very accurate. They're okay, but there's issues. With Jung Gi, it seems he has a very intuitive understanding of perspective. So his stuff looks cool, and it seems to make sense, but it's not perfect. And it doesn't need to be perfect. It's good enough. And the reality is, if you learn extremely rigid perspective rules, you will soon realize that if you apply these to the real world, they don't apply. And the reason is that humans are building things and these things aren't perfect. Or nature is not, like the ground kind of has level changes. And you're laughing about Romanian houses?
Yeah, you're just describing Romanian houses, Romanian streets.
Yeah.
No two sidewalks are the same level.
Yeah.
No two steps the same height.
Yeah, and things kind of look better that way anyway. Or at least to some people, I think. Not in Romania, but just having variation in terms of things where it's like, it doesn't exactly line up. It doesn't quite follow the vanishing point. It's like, well, yes, because it wasn't created perfectly. There are imperfections in everything that, is in nature. So.
I remember when IKEA first came to Romania, and people were buying furniture from IKEA. But in Romania, most of the apartment buildings and even the houses, they're not quite level and they're not quite straight. The walls aren't straight. Mm-hmm. So people were just placing these standardized objects into very non-standardized concrete walls, and they look crooked and they look super cheap. Mm. Like the furniture looks wrong because the house is wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a clash of. Well,
yeah. So anyway, in reality, most things do not line up to perfect perspective. So we're not actually looking at perfect perspective a lot. We're looking at almost perfect perspective. And so sometimes when you look at things that are extremely well done in terms of perspective, it can almost look artificial, like a 3D model doesn't quite look right. And it's because it doesn't have enough imperfection in it that is natural, like natural imperfections. So, yeah. All right. And then for style, basically, copy as much as you want until you can morph it into your own style, or just draw a lot and let it kind of happen. So it's basically whatever works for you in terms of style. When you're intuitive, you don't really think as much as you do when you're analytical, so you don't get into a lot of problems. It's just the problem with that is that you can't really tell anyone what you're doing. If anyone asks you, well, how did you do this? You don't know. And so words like talent seem to pop up when analytical people try to explain unconscious or intuitive ideas. They can't. They have a lot of trouble with it. And so they bring up other concepts like talent or magic or
because they need to bring in more words.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't feel like there's enough words in the sentence. Just do what you like. Where's the rest of it? Where's the bulk of it?
It's kind of like the God in the gaps idea where if something's explainable, it's science. But if it's not, then it's God. or angels did it, or it's the unknown, and therefore it's free to put whatever weird idea you may have. You just put it on things that you don't know, whereas the appropriate thing would be to label it. If you have to label it as the unknown. You don't need to say this is talent, because the reality is you don't know what it is. So just say, I don't know what that is. And then that's
But
more
that's
honest.
a very, for a person who relies on control via words, saying that this is unknown is a huge, like, no, this can't be. I can't have this, emotionally speaking.
Well, I don't know about that, I guess. I guess if you need to feel smart all the time and you want to just say something, like I've noticed there are these people who, even if they don't know stuff, they just have to say something. I have to have my say. I think
especially nowadays, most people have that to some extent, because we've become so trained into, if you don't have something, there's no comfortable silence or thought or reflection on thoughts or inner monologue or whatever have you.
Yeah. So the end of this, I think, is that analytical approaches have a lot of positives and some negatives. Intuitive approaches have a lot of positives and some negatives. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, although they both do different things. But I feel like the best option is synthesis. Like, they make up for each other's faults. If you have both of these things, if you are analytical enough to explain what you're doing, but intuitive enough to creatively conjure images from your unconscious that are very interesting, I think that's better. It's better to be able to, use random color sense, not random, but I mean intuitive color sense, and then also know enough color theory where if someone says, why did you use that color? You could just say, it feels right, but you can also say, well, yeah, I basically structured it after this color scheme, but I use that. But if I had to choose one or the other, intuitive or analytical, for myself personally, hands down, every time I would pick intuitive, because it achieves the goals best for me. So if I was someone who, and it's because I like manga, I like character designs, I like animation-y stuff more than I like realism. So for me, it's like, well, I'd rather have that because I find that cooler. However, if what I wanted was to be like an artist on doing magic cards or illustration or like realistic paintings and portraits and stuff, I would pick analytical. So I think it's very important to understand what you are and what these things take. Like, it's easier to learn analytical things, but learning analytical things doesn't mean you will be able to draw intuitively. And I think that's like my big point, is that don't expect these things, and also don't expect the inverse. Don't expect because you've learned to draw from reference that it's somehow not good. Because chances are the people who you admire also are using reference, if that's your case. Like, oh, I really like to draw realistically, and there's this other artist who draws really well, but I also want to draw ideas from my imagination, but as well as that person does it. It's like, but they're using reference, or at least a lot of reference, and then it's a case of, it's almost arrogant to me to assume that you should be able to do things that you can't, like, you don't really, like, there's no reason why you should be able to. It's like, why do you think you should be able to draw things from imagination? Well, this person can. Yeah, but that person uses reference and has studied a lot for many years, or at least has studied reference for many years until they've learned how to replicate it. And they're sort of, well, yeah, but that's what I want to do. Okay, so that's what you want to do. So I want to be able to draw as good as every artist ever who will ever be, but it doesn't mean I will. But it's like, that would be cool. Mind you, if I had that, I think I would continue just drawing like one artist. So I'd finally be able to get over the inferiority complex. I would only draw like other people to prove that I could.
So much of this is emotional. So much of this is mental.
It's mental. But basically, guys, you have thesis, antithesis, and you combine to have synthesis. That is the ultimate goal. Synthesis.
Yeah.
All right. So, thanks, Flavia, for being here on another podcast. I'm sure we're going to get interesting comments.
Yay.
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 Tutorials anymore. That hurts my feelings.
Wasn't there a time when YouTube had these like video response things?
Yeah.
I think it would be funny.
I
think it would be funny if they could just like these angry people. I wish I could see it.
Teach me to draw like the 14-year-old twats. The goddamn 14-year-old twats who in 2 hours learned how to draw like an art god. I just see it's like all Peter Gray images. Art god. Anyway. All right. For everyone listening who's stuck in this far,
you are brave.
Yeah. Hope this helped. And thanks for listening and watching because we had visuals this time.
Yeah.
Yay. Bye.